In 1994, a 3-year-old girl's ordinary walk to buy an ice cream ended in a horrifying tragedy that shocked the UK. This is the story of Rosie Palmer. Rosie Palmer murder took place in Hartlepool, County Durham, England on 30 June 1994. 3-year-old Rose Frances Palmer was abducted, ordered and murdered after buying an ice pop from an ice cream van only 20 meters from her home. Her partially clothed and mutilated body was found in a house 50 meters from her own on 3 July 1994. On 30 June 1994, Palmer was playing at a neighbour's house in Henrietta Street, Hartlepool, after being collected from nursery school by her stepfather, John Thornton. At approximately 15:30, Gary Amerigo, the local ice cream vendor, arrived and Palmer went to ask Thornton if she could have money to buy an ice pop. She was the only customer, and after serving her, the ice cream salesman left and continued his route. Amerigo said later, "Only Rosie came up to my van that day. She didn't have enough money, but I gave her the ice cream anyway. She seemed just her usual self, bright and cheerful." Armstrong, who was celebrating his 32nd birthday that day, abducted her as she walked away after making her purchase. It was approximately 2 hours before Thornton realised Palmer was no longer at the neighbours or playing outside the house. He and other local residents began to search the local area for her, and at 20:45 she was reported missing to the police. The police search operation was headed by Detective Superintendent Doe Smith of Cleveland Police and involved door-to-door inquiries, tracker dogs, and local volunteers. Warehouses, industrial buildings, and disused buildings around the adjacent docks were searched while HM Coast Guard, a police helicopter, and a Royal National Lifeboat Institution lifeboat searched the sea and shore. Police first called at Armstrong's flat on 1 July while conducting initial door-to-door inquiries during which residents were asked to answer a questionnaire aimed at tracing her last movements. On 2 July, they returned while carrying out cursory searches of houses in the area. On 3 July too, detectives spoke to Armstrong. They noticed that his previously cooperative, friendly, and helpful demeanour had changed, and that he then appeared very shifty, on edge, and looking very worried. Acting on suspicion, the detectives arrested Armstrong and a second search of his first-floor flat was conducted. Palmer's mutilated body was found under a settee in the loft in the flat. Her shorts and underwear were found nearby in a separate bag. Armstrong denied any involvement in the crime and claimed that someone else must have put the body there. Anthony Tony Armstrong was born Anthony Wilkinson on 30 June 1962 in Easington and had lived in the County Durham and Cleveland area for most of his life, moving into a council-owned flat on Frederick Street in August 1993. Later in his life, he took the surname of his stepfather, George. He was unemployed, with a dependency on alcohol and prescription drugs, and had a string of previous convictions to his name. He had been investigated in relation to Essex offences against children, although never charged. He was also diagnosed with a personality disorder and a psychopathic personality. He had obtained the flat after his psychiatric consultant wrote a supporting letter to the housing department stating that he was vulnerable. On the estate he was called Tony the Pervert and was generally considered a loner, disliked or distrusted by all those who knew him. On 30 June 1994, Armstrong, who had been drunk for 2 days solid, partying for his birthday at different people's houses and pubs and clubs, arrived home by taxi at 15:30, about the same time that the ice cream van pulled into Henrietta Street. The rear of Armstrong's flat backed onto the cul-de-sac where Palmer purchased her ice cream. The post-mortem examination determined that she was dead by 16:30, although pathologists were unable to give a specific cause of death due to the condition of her body. Smith told a news conference, "She had been severely say that is a possible cause of death, the actual injury itself. At around 16:30, Armstrong called in at a local shop where he said he was going to help look for the little girl who had vanished, even though Rosie Palmer had not yet been reported missing. The shopkeeper noticed blood on Armstrong's hands, which Armstrong said was the result of being bitten by his dog, despite the absence of any wound. Armstrong then took his dog and a bottle of cider to the nearby beach and began running in and out of the sea for 2 hours, until neighbours reported him to the police, who arrived and told him to go home. Armstrong was charged with murder and remanded in custody to await trial at Leeds Crown Court. He planned to feign mental illness and plead guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. However, while on remand, he admitted to the murder and revealed his plan to feign insanity in a letter to crime author Bernard O'Mahony, who had posed as a woman in hope of getting a written confession from the killer. This letter was given to police and shown to the jury at Armstrong's trial, and he quickly changed his plea to guilty of murder. Armstrong was sentenced to life imprisonment on 28 July 1995. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Ognow, did not make any recommendation as to how many years Armstrong should serve before he could be considered for parole, though in a High Court ruling of May 2006, Mr. Justice Crane set the minimum term to 16 years, subject to a deduction of 12 months and 21 days for the period on remand, meaning Armstrong was eligible for parole in July 2010. In March 2010, with Armstrong's earliest possible release date just 4 months away, Yates oversaw the launch of a campaign in Hartlepool for Armstrong to be placed on the ZX offenders register when and if he is paroled. As the law stands, he will not go onto the register once released, because he was not convicted of a sexual offence. Armstrong's 7th application for parole was rejected in March 2023, as was his application to be moved to an open prison. The parole board also ruled that it would not consider Armstrong for parole until at least 2025, by which time Armstrong, now one of Britain's longest-serving prisoners, will have spent more than 30 years in custody.